Now, with festive season fast approaching, concerns are rising that South Africans will overindulge and not make use of their bonuses and 13th cheques productively. Joining us now to explore more is Elizabeth Nanzari, who's the CEO of the South African Savings Institute. Elizabeth, thanks for your time today. When we take a look at the savings trends in South Africa, I know that we rank amongst the lowest worldwide. Are you concerned as to how this might change, given the fact that the festive season is coming up?
Well, as is always the case, when it comes to the festive season, it's overblown out of proportion again, mainly because consumers in South Africa do not plan as much when it comes to the festive season, yet they want to always make merry and celebrate, justifiably so. So yes, it is a concern, because what they do is going out of their means and then borrowing, which ultimately has long-lasting implications, especially coming into the next year. So yes, it is a very big concern for us, and we constantly remind consumers around this time that when you get that bonus, that paycheck, the 13th check, and the rest of the gifts that are going to come to you during the festive season, please try and think about the new months, of January and February, before you take your kids to school, when you have to go back to work as well, medical expenses. And so it always works. The few that really heed our messages do see themselves starting the year on a cleaner slate than the rest of them that don't plan. So it is a concern, yes.
Elizabeth, what's the reality of the average South African's indebtedness levels?
At the moment, you're talking about 75 of every 100 rand that a person has as disposable income going to debt repayment. I mean, that leaves you something like 25, which I'm not so sure that can take a consumer very far, looking at especially the cost of transportation to go to work, which usually it's up to about 30 out of every 100. So when you look at that situation, it is highly unlikely that a person will have anything remaining whatsoever to save. So you kind of find this debt spiral that a person will ultimately borrow to pay off another lender, and that continues year in and throughout the year, going forward. So the reality right now is that consumers, yes, are struggling, and the consumer financial vulnerability, shows that they are under pressure. And there is, yes, increase in credit access, especially the unsecured bit of it. However, we just want to acknowledge that we have seen out of the recent research that there are two types of consumers here: those that go and get the credit for consumption and payment of bills, medical and utility, and then we're also seeing the other side of another consumer who is actually borrowing to, for developmental purposes, be it property or education. Now that has been a little bit encouraging. We actually just worried that at the current situation of low employment and incomes that are not very high, we wonder whether people will be able to sustain their debt repayment and ultimately cling on to what they have acquired through debt. So the debt situation is a problem, because debt and saving are cousins. A person doesn't save, then they borrow, and once they start borrowing, they can't save. So we still have a situation here of borrowing.
Elizabeth, we know the concerns with regard to the lower LSM market in South Africa and their high levels of indebtedness. But what about high net worth individuals? The guys driving the Beamers and living in fancy houses, it's not often that we hear of them being in debt.
Oh no, actually the situation cuts across. When you think about it and looking at the results, the guys that are heavily indebted, they're all indebted across the board. It's just that what is the value of the indebtedness? You look at let's say the men. That's part of the research that's come out. The men, guys in the higher LSMs, the kind of credit they're accumulating is, yes, towards the Beamers that you're seeing, the MLs and property, high value items. On the lower side, the indebtedness is towards the informal sector, because that is where they can access the credit. So you find that because the informal sector is not regulated, it is not very easy to put an exact value as to how much they owe. But we know through the index, like the vulnerability index, that somebody feels like I'm not comfortable financially, I'm not doing well. So we know that cutting across, everybody is equally indebted, and the problem is that cutting across, South Africans lack the relevant financial literacy, financial education, such that even a well-to-do person goes in and picks credit but doesn't really understand the obligations accruing to that credit. So as a result, you're seeing across the board, let's not fool ourselves and say the guys on the higher end are doing well and the guys on the lower end are doing worse. In fact, the people at the lower end know a little bit better. Your people in the Stockfields are saving for short term towards something. They really get into, even when they get into credit, let's say, they know that somehow through their their community network or social networks, they'll be able to cover that. So it cuts across, I think.
You mentioned the financial literacy there. We know that clearly there's not enough financial education in the South African market. Shouldn't that be an indicator to financial institutions and maybe organizations like yourself to increase financial awareness in the South African sphere?
We're doing exactly that at the Savings Institute through several campaigns. We partner with the banking industry for financial literacy towards children through the Teach Children to Save campaign. We go on to the varsity students because we know there is money there. Those kids do have money, they're just not well guided because they engage in a lot of part-time jobs and they're able to get as much as 5,000 per month. You can think about that, which is a salary for somebody else. Then we go into the communities, we go into employers' workplaces because we know several of them have invited us. We talk to all cohorts of the population. And now going to the financial industry, I think we have a problem here. We have a paradox here. Anybody who is out to make profit to a certain extent will want to thrive on the ignorance of the other party. So yes, they know, but how many people do get credit and they are actually not told exactly what their obligations are around that credit? For as long as you remain indebted, the lender, earns, out of the money that is outstanding. So there is a situation here, and yes, we've been calling on the financial sector, and consumers themselves have mentioned it, that they go to the banking industry or the formal financial institutions, and they do not get as much support as they should. So financial education or literacy requires that, yes, we tell the consumers everything, as much as they need to know all the terminologies, that jargon behind which we hide to actually exploit them. They need to understand it. Further, they need to understand their obligations, plus the mechanisms of recourse should they have a problem. Now, the latter two is what we hide from them, and they are subsequently not able to make effective contributions or participate effectively in the financial industry. We've mentioned this, yes, and we're hoping that through the consumer education units in the in the financial sector, financial services providers, they should be able to cover that component properly and more effectively than perhaps they do, because quite often we see product promotion as opposed to actually educating the consumer and telling them their rights and obligations.
I agree with that last part. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was Elizabeth Luanga Nanzari, Chief Executive of the South African Savings Institute.